A Shot in the Dark by Silverpup. Chapter 21. Ori had never considered himself very brave. Growing up poor and homeless, he had learned what fear meant at a young age. His earliest memory was watching his ma's body being buried in some nameless grave in some nameless village of men. She had died from a plague that had taken half the village, and had nearly taken Ori too. Somehow he was able to overcome it and get better, but his ma had not been so lucky. She had died and left his brothers and him to take on the world alone. That memory, that fear of watching his ma die and nearly dying himself, stuck with him for the rest of his life. It made him cautious and leery of the outside world, where things like sickness and death were far too common. He had spent a good portion of his childhood hiding away in his room with only his few books and toys for company. It didn't help either that both his brothers encouraged his fear in their own ways. Ori loved Dory more than he had ever loved his ma, but his brother was overprotective to the extreme. He always warned his little brothers of the dangers in the world, and stressed how important it was to be safe and smart. While Nori had taken his advice as a challenge to get into as much trouble as possible, Ori had taken it to heart that he always had to be careful because the world could so easily crush him as it did his ma. Nori had, too, unknowingly made his little brother very wary of ever taking a step outside of his house. Ori had more memories than he cared for of his middle brother coming home with a black eye, a split lip, or bruised knuckles. Seeing his strong and fearless brother so badly hurt had simply driven home how even the most powerful of dwarves could still fall to the wicked ways of the outside world. With this constant fear of being hurt or dying in the back of his mind, Ori had lived life skittish and withdrawn. He never took great risks, and he never chanced his safety if he could avoid it. In return, his life was very safe and routine. If he sometimes wondered what it would be like to see unexplored lands, then that was his own private fantasy. Everything changed when he met Mr. Baggins. Bilbo Baggins was the same height as him, but not as nearly densely built as a dwarf. His wrists were petite and delicate, and he seemed to bruise so very easily. He even wore only 2 layers of clothes that were so thin he could see the flex of the hobbit's muscles when he moved. When Ori was introduced to him, he had felt a jolt of sick fear for the small hobbit that could be so easily crushed. How were they ever supposed to protect someone like that? Of course, all these impressions were shattered after the troll incident. It had stunned him, to be sure. How could someone like Bilbo, who could not wield a sword and carried around a handkerchief, ever muster the courage to face 3 trolls alone? If that wasn't enough, Bilbo went on to challenge orcs, shapeshifters, and even a dragon without batting an eye. He was fearless to the point of reckless, and so easily risked his own life for the others. Ori could not understand it. Where did such bravery come from? How did he do it every day without ever faltering? How could Bilbo face the world head-on with all its horrors and deaths, and yet still smile? It was perplexing. It was unnatural. And it was also amazing. Ori did not want to be a coward. He wanted to live like Bilbo did, easily and laughing as he explored the forgotten wonders of the world. He wanted to visit places that he had only ever heard whispers of, and discover lands that existed only in legend. He wanted to be brave and strong and able to live his life without being crippled by the constant terror of death. And if Mr. Baggins, who had lost his one and was so small that Ori sometimes thought of him as a bird, could be brave, then perhaps one day Ori could be the same. Thorin and Mover both jumped at the sudden shrieking hobbit as he proceeded to scream his lungs out. Bilbo was quite sure he looked like a child having a temper tantrum, but he really didn't care. He needed an outlet for his frustration, and it was either screaming or punching someone in the face. Since he couldn't choose between Thorin and Thranduil, screaming won out. When he finally stopped, he found the 2 dwarves silently staring at him with mixed expressions. He ignored them both, turned on his heel, and marched out of the hall and back to the gates. There he found Gandalf and Balin arguing with a familiar elven king, while Oin stood off to the side, watching. Bard and his men had disappeared, but he spotted Dwalin and Nori standing with the healer, while outside lingered 3 mounted elves that he did not recognize. "Can't just march in here like that," Balin scolded, glaring up at the king.
"I don't see why not. Your door is wide open," retorted Thranduil, coolly unfazed.
Gandalf stood between the 2 and looked close to smacking them both with his staff.
"Enough arguing now, will not..." I have simply come for what was promised me, interrupted the elf, arching a eyebrow. Grant me my reward, and I will happily leave you all alone.
There's nothing to grant. We haven't even split the treasure yet, snapped Balin.
Then I won't be leaving so soon, now will I?
Thranduil, stop antagonizing him. What is going on here?
Bellowed Thorin as he stomped into the halls with Beaufort trailing after him. The arguing trio turned to the Dwarf King as one. Balin relaxed as Gandalf groaned, and Thranduil pulled his lips back in the slightest hint of a snarl.
What is that doing here?
Thorin demanded, pointing to Thranduil, but looking to Balin for an answer. I was promised a portion of the treasure, and I have come for it, the elf answered before Balin could speak up. The Dwarf King sneered.
You will get nothing from me, Kalir Rooks.
Thranduil simply looked at him without blinking. My arrangement was not made with you. All eyes immediately went to Bilbo, who could only shrug. I did make a deal with him. My portion for our freedom. And I held up my part of the bargain, added the elf, tilting his head to the side slightly. Now it is your turn, halfling. The hobbit nodded and waved a hand impatiently. Yes, yes, I will uphold my end as well. You will have your promised treasure.
He will not,
objected Thorin, making a slicing motion with one hand. His dark eyes burned brutally as he glared up at the Elven King.
You will get nothing from us. Get out now before I cut you down. Master Oakenshield, control yourself,
thundered Gandalf, the air crackling around him with tightly controlled power. Balin discreetly took a few steps back, but Thranduil did not even blink as his liquid blonde hair whipped around his shoulders. Thorin did not look threatened either, and even stepped closer to the wizard. Bilbo quickly reached out and locked his hands around the dwarf's forearm before he did something stupid in his madness. Enough, Thorin, he soothed, wrapping his arms around the muscled limb and digging his heels into the ground. We will get nowhere with threats, so calm down.
Aye, Bilbo is right,
agreed Balin, moving to stand at Thorin's other side and settling his hand on his cousin's shoulder to ground him.
Yelling will not solve anything. Take a breath and relax before you give yourself another headache.
Thorin glared at them both, but slowly forced himself to relax. Bilbo did not relax his grip, though, and noticed Balin discreetly signal something to his brother. Whatever it was, Balin understood as he began to carefully inch around the room where Thorin would not notice him.
I will not give anything to this cowardly wretch,
the warrior king swore, curling his hands into fists.
Nobody did nothing to deserve it. All of the treasure in this mountain belongs to my people who shed blood, sweat, and tears to create it. They owe nothing to this filthy liar who turned them away when they came begging for aid.
Thranduil's carefully constructed mask finally cracked. His blue eyes thinned into slits of azure, and his lips pulled back at one corner into a fairly unattractive snarl that showed a hint of his teeth. Do not test my patience, you ignorant little maggot. I have been lenient with your temper tantrum till now, but I grow weary of your whining. Give me the gold I was promised. Now. At the end of his sentence, Thorin immediately attempted to lunge at the Elven King and was only stopped by Dwalin as he came up behind and wrapped his cousin in a bear hug. With the three of them, they were able to hold the Dwarf King back from potentially maiming Thranduil and starting another war with the elves.
Thorin, calm down, you fool,
snapped Dwalin, leaning his head away so he didn't get smacked in the face by the struggling king. Thorin simply snarled something back in Khaz'dal and attempted to headbutt Dwalin again. Look at him. He's like a mad dog that needs to be put down, answered Thranduil.
Would you kindly shut up? You're not helping, Bilbo snapped back, glaring at the elf.
Bilbo is right. Stop riling him up,
advised Gandalf, giving the king a stink eye.
In fact, perhaps it would be better if you left for now.
I will not leave without what was promised to me, retorted the Elven King.
And you will get it,
reassured Balin, ignoring Thorin as he swore at him.
But you need to give us time. Come back in a week and we will have your reward set for you.
We will have nothing but my blade.
Thorin began to rant, only to be cut off by Bilbo's hand. Thranduil looked at Balin, then to Thorin, before finally back to Balin. You have 3 days. If the deal is not honored peacefully by then, I will take my portion from you law by force. Fine, agreed the hobbit, making a shooing gesture with his free hand. Great, deal, now go! The Elven King inclined his head slightly before turning away in a dramatic whirl of silk and velvet. Bilbo rolled in his eyes as the elf glided out of the mountain. Were all kings so dramatic? Aragorn had certainly seemed level-headed, but perhaps he was the only exception. It was only after the elves were completely out of sight that they finally released Thorin. When they did, the Dwarf King spun around and punched Dwalin in the jaw before delivering the same treatment to Balin. Bilbo darted back quickly before the same could happen to him. Dwalin and Balin were dwarves and could handle such a punch without trouble. Hobbits, though, were not built to withstand such powerful strikes.
How dare you speak for me?
The king growled, glaring at his cousins with midnight eyes.
Have you forgotten who your king is?
I have not forgotten who my king is, but my king has forgotten himself, Dwalin sneered, rubbing his jaw lightly. Dwalin is right. Thorin, this is not you. You are not this violent or angry, pointed out Balin, looking unfazed by the punch. Don't you see it? You're acting like...
Like your grandfather,
finished Gandalf, his grey eyes as hard and unflinching as stone.
You are losing your mind, Thorin Oakenshield, just as your grandfather did, and his father before him, and his father before him. Thorin's curse has finally caught up with you. Shut up!
Roared Thorin, his face turning a harsh red that clashed horribly with his coloring.
Do not speak to me of matters you know nothing of. My grandfather may have lost himself to this madness, but I am not him. I am stronger than he ever was, and I will not fall to the gold fever.
Then what do you call this? Bilbo asked softly, feeling the fight drain out of him. He felt tired and used up and far older than his years. If they could not snap Thorin out of his madness, then what was he supposed to do? Would he have to steal the Arkenstone and end his friendship with Thorin once more? Or would the king only regain his wits on his deathbed again? What if he saved Thorin from death only to deliver him to an even darker fate? Thorin turned to him and paused. His eyes lightened slightly and his mouth pulled down at the corners as he took in the hobbit.
Bilbo, please. I cannot give that coward the gold he desires. Don't you remember what I said before? How my people crafted all the treasure to be found in this mountain. That treasure belongs to them. I cannot give it away so simply.
Yet you promised the company a portion, if they helped you, he pointed out, crossing his arms over his chest. How do you explain that?
Because they are dwarves from Erebor,
the king replied, moving closer to the burglar. Bilbo took a step back on impulse, and the dwarf froze, his face shifting into one of surprise and then pain.
You are afraid of me,
Thorin realized quietly, his shoulders slumping and his brows lowering. Not of you, he corrected, but what your madness may turn you into. Thorin, you are my friend, and I will always trust you with my life, but this is not you. This is not the Thorin I have come to know. This is a dangerous stranger, driven by the power of a pretty rock, and I cannot trust that. The king's face grew darker.
You keep blaming the Arkenstone for my state of mind, but I cannot take your words seriously. Not when you were against the jewel from the very beginning and bid me to get rid of it.
Because I didn't want it to come to this, he explained, flapping his hand at the Dwarf King. I feared what that blasted stone would do to you, and I was right. You've lost your mind to it.
I have not lost anything,
retorted Thorin, glaring at him. They were going in circles, maddening, dizzying circles. Yes, you are, and I'm done arguing with you, Bilbo snapped, turning around and stalking back into the mountain.
Where are you going?
The king demanded from behind. Away from you, he replied as Nori and Oin quickly moved out of his way. And don't follow me, because I'm not talking to you until you regain your senses.
You won't be speaking for the next few years,
translated Gandalf, because he secretly enjoyed causing trouble. Thorin snapped something back, but he didn't catch it. He didn't mind. He was sure it was nothing good. Despite their best efforts, Bard and the men of Lake Town left Erebor that day to return home. Bilbo watched them go with pursed lips and wondered if the next time he saw them it would be on the battlefield. At his side, Gandalf watched as well with hard grey eyes, reading something into the exile of the men that he could only guess at. Has anyone been able to talk any sense into him? He asked the wizard as they stood together at the gates of Erebor.
No, he is ignoring us all and has holed himself up in one of the rooms,
Gandalf replied, scowling at the fading backs of Bard and his men. Bilbo sighed and rubbed his forehead. What are we going to do? Thranduil won't just let this go.
No, he won't,
the wizard agreed, sighing deeply and leaning against his staff.
I fear we may need to sneak the treasure to him, or keep Thorin occupied long enough to give the king his portion."
He wrinkled his nose. "And if Thorin catches us?" Gandalf's scowl deepened.
"Let us hope he doesn't. I have no interest in fighting a friend."
Bilbo didn't think things could get much worse, but found himself proven wrong the next day. Dain Ironfoot arrived and brought what looked like his entire army. Bilbo did not see the king when he arrived, but he certainly noticed when the halls were flooded by heavily armored dwarves.
"Where did they all come from?" asked Fili as his brother gaped at his side.
Bilbo looked over the familiar iron armor and boots and knew exactly where they came from.
"The Iron Hills. These are dwarves from the Iron Hills." "Uncle Dain is here," realized Keely as his face bloomed into a white smile. He turned and raised his brows at the prince. "Uncle? I thought he was your cousin." "He is, but he's always been more like an uncle than a cousin," explained the archer, his brown eyes bright. "He always sent me birthday gifts, and once he took me and Fee drinking at this pub." We're ending the story there," interrupted Fili, wrapping an arm around his brother's head and covering his mouth with his hand. "Dain is a distant cousin, but he's always been good to us. He even took in a good deal of dwarves from Erebor after it fell. I'm not surprised he came to help us." Bilbo had not thought of that. He had not known that Dain had been so close to the two princes, but that Thorin had mentioned liking him best of his Iron Hills kin. He would certainly not allow anyone he didn't trust so close to his precious nephews. "Dain must be with Thorin," Fili mused before suddenly squawking and pushing his brother away. "Gross, Keely! Don't lick my hand! I don't know where your tongue has been!" Keely stuck his questionable tongue out at his brother as Fili wiped his hand vigorously against his pants. "Next time, keep your hand to yourself. Come on, Bilbo, let's go see him. You'll love Uncle Dain." Before Bilbo could speak and dispute that claim, the youngest prince grabbed his arm and dragged him off. He heard Keely groan before following them through the throng of unfamiliar dwarves. He tried his best not to get dizzy as Keely took sharp and sudden turns and twists to avoid running into any of the dwarves. Though he didn't appreciate being dragged around like a doll, he did appreciate how the young dwarf did his best to keep Bilbo from colliding with any of the strangers. He didn't think his ribs would hold up against their iron armor. Keely did not stop until they entered the gates, where they found Thorin speaking to a grim-faced dwarf with graying auburn hair and an impressive beard that fell to his waist in curls and braids. When Keely saw them, he let out a high shriek of joy. "Uncle Dain!" he called in greeting, releasing Bilbo to sprint to the dwarf. The grim-faced dwarf turned at the call and broke out into a smile that was, even with all those scars, charming. "File! Gayle! What are you favorite imps?" Keely laughed and threw himself at Dain in an engulfing embrace that made Bilbo wince. With all that armor between them, he thought it looked rather painful and uncomfortable. But neither dwarf seemed to mind as they butted foreheads and greeted one another in a mix of common and Gusdal. Fili approached at a slower pace, but his smile was no less bright as he clasped hands with Dain and butted their foreheads together in greeting. The prince muttered something to the older dwarf that had him giggling and thumping him on the shoulder. So tastes never change," chuckled Dain as he released Fili with one final pat. "Thorin, why did you not mention how much they had grown? Fili is practically an adult Keely even defeated Smaug, the little dwarfs that used to eat sand on our jaded warriors." Keely puffed his chest out and pulled his shoulders back while Fili groaned beside him. "You're never going to let that same thing go, are you?" "You two ate so much of it that you made yourself sick," Dain reminded him, arching his brows. "This stabbed me in the thigh for it and stole all my good ale. For that, I'll be sharing this tale on your wedding days."
"It was rather funny," admitted Thorin, shrugging at his nephew's glare. "And it's not the most embarrassing thing you two have ever done. Remember that farmer's pony?"
"Anyway," Keely interrupted loudly before he so quickly continued his trip down memory lane. "We have someone you have to meet, Dain. Bilbo, come here." The hobbit dutifully walked over to the prince and listened as he was introduced by the young dwarf. "Uncle Dain, I present to you our hobbit burglar, Bilbo Baggins. Bilbo, this is our favorite cousin, Dain Ironfoot, son of Nain, son of Gror, and Lord of the Iron Hills." Durin blue eyes slowly looked over Bilbo before settling on his hair. When he did, Dain blinked and spoke something in Gusdal. Thorin replied in the same language and pulled his shoulders back with a smirk. Dain turned to him and raised one brow high. "Seriously?" he asked in comment, staring at Thorin.
"You have to ask,"
retorted his cousin, crossing his thick arms over his broad chest.
"Come now, you know me better than that."
Dain nodded and glanced at Bilbo again before looking back to the king.
True. I just didn't think you would ever...
Neither did I,
admitted Thorin.
shrugging one shoulder. Yet it happened, and now I will have no other.
Huh. Dain turned back to Bilbo and stared at the hobbit with his head tilted to the side. Interesting. Well, I am pleased to meet you, Master Baggins. And you, Master Ironfoot, he returned, nodding his head politely. You have come at a good time. Perhaps you can convince His Majesty he's not to go to war with the elves over a deal that I made. Thorin groaned while Dain frowned.
Bilbo, do not bring this up now. Dain has just arrived from a long journey.
Didn't I say not to speak to me until you regained your senses? He interrupted, giving the warrior king a side glare. Are you normal again? Are you going to admit the Arkenstone has turned you into a fool? That banishing the men of Lake Town and threatening Thranduil was a bad idea? No? Then stop talking! Dain began to choke on what seemed like nothing but air while Thorin narrowed his now normal shadowy eyes.
I've told you before that I do not trust those men and elves. I will not grant either of them access to Erebor or Hobelf until my people are seen to.
Your people are on the other side of the continent, Bilbo pointed out, raising his hands on his hips. And in case you didn't notice, they'll be returning to nothing but rubble if we don't fix this place up. Which, by the way, cannot be accomplished without the help of the people of Lake Town.
Erebor will be rebuilt with the help of Dain and the dwarves he has brought, retorted Thorin. We do not need those men now. As for the elves, I will not grant them a coin of the treasure that they seek to steal. They have no right for it.
It was my portion that was promised, he stressed, glaring at the king. The portion that I earned. Does that not mean it is my choice to do with it as I like?
None of it is going to Thranduil,
growled Thorin. What are you two arguing about? Dain asked, cutting into their conversation. Bilbo spoke up before Thorin could begin to rant. Thorin has lost his mind to the Arkenstone.
I have not,
denied the king, while Dain's eyes grew larger.
You just hold an irrational hatred for it.
Then why did you agree to the deal with Thranduil one day, and then change your mind the next? And you welcomed the men from Lake Town without a problem, but turned them away a week later, he reminded the dwarf. All of this happened after you found that sparkly stone. Before that, you were fine.
There's a point there, Keely agreed softly, cringing as Thorin turned his glare on him. You did start acting off after we found the stone.
Enough! I will hear no more of this nonsense, rumbled the king out of the mountain, making a slicing motion with one hand. I am fine, and the Arkenstone is not a threat.
Bilbo snorted loudly and gave the king a dirty look. This is hilarious. Is there a betting pool going on? Dain whispered to the two princes. Talk to Nori. He'll set you up, Feely whispered back. I heard that, Bilbo snapped, turning on the three with a glare. Enough with the jokes. This is a serious matter. Oh, I couldn't agree more, Dain said, blue eyes narrowing. We do have a serious matter on our hands. On our way here, we realized that the Defiler is on the move. He is leading an army of orcs and goblins to Erebor. We are going to war. Why are they staring at me? Dwalin shrugged, looking more concerned over fixing his boots than the hobbit next to him. Don't worry, probably not so used to seeing a hobbit. Doubt most of them even know what a hobbit is. Bilbo eyed one of the unknown dwarves as they pointed to him again and said something to their companion in Guzdo. They're looking at my hair.
Maybe they're jealous of your beads,
suggested Bofer. Bilbo watched as the two dwarves laughed and shook their heads and made a rude hand gesture at him. I don't think it's the beads they're looking at. Dwalin looked up at the two dwarfs, narrowed his eyes, and then threw his boot at the two. It hit one of them in the face, and they went down with a shout. The other squawked and looked ready to come to their friend's aid until they saw Dwalin stand up. He quickly grabbed his companion, and the two scampered off. Bover cackled, and Bilbo rolled his eyes, and Dwalin went to retrieve his boot. Never mind, I don't want to know what they're saying.
It's not very interesting,
reassured Bover, winking at him. Now I really don't want to know, he muttered, rubbing his face. Have they come out of the room yet? The miner clucked his tongue.
Nope, the door is still shut.
Of course it is, he sighed, dropping his hand into his lap. Since Dain's announcement of Azog, Thorin had called a meeting between himself, Dain, Balin, and Gandalf. They had locked themselves up in one of the rooms hours ago and had yet to reappear. He did not know if this was because they were busy making plans or because Thorin was being stupid and refusing to listen to reason still. He had a strong feeling it was because of the latter reason.
Do you think Dain will make him see sense? He wondered out loud as Dwalin rejoined them. Unlikely, growled the warrior as he plopped back into his seat with his boot. If Balin and you couldn't get through to him, then Dain won't have much of a chance. Kinda wish we had those men still here, admitted Beaufort, scratching one dirty cheek. They would be a lot of help right about now. Bilbo winced as Dwalin nodded in agreement. I hate to say it, but we're not going to win this. Not with that heavy losses. A lot of dwarves are going to die, the Tormaker agreed softly. One of us might.
The bodies extend into the horizon like a sea of the dead. Even while he squints, he can still not see an end to it all. Dwarf, elf, man, orc, there is no discrimination in death. They all lay where they have fallen with their unblinking eyes staring up at him. The smell of the dead is strong and makes him gag and his eyes water. He cannot look at the corpses for long because he feels guilty that he has lived while they have not. No one is going to die if I can help it, he declared, pushing back his memories. Dwalin scoffed at him, but his dark eyes were gentle. Not even your tricks can stop death, burglar. No, he agreed, eyes narrowing on the closed door where the meeting was being held. But I can even the odds. It was not until the sun had set and the moon was high that the doors were finally thrown open. The loud noise startled Bilbo into jumping to his feet in alarm, only to find Gandalf storming out with a string of curses. He watched the enraged wizard stalk off before looking to the door where Balin and Dain were also storming out, both wearing an enraged yet sad expression. They failed to notice the hobbit in the corner as they walked off after Gandalf, whispering to each other and making dramatic hand gestures. Bilbo looked back to the door, and when Thorin failed to emerge, he slowly walked to it. He peeked inside and found the king sitting at a broken table with his head in his hands. His broad shoulders were slumped, and his hair was a mess of black curls and braids. He did not look like the king under the mountain, but simply a tired and old dwarf. It made his heart want to break all over again. Thorin, he called softly, walking into the room to where the king sat. Thorin lifted his head and met his eyes.
Bilbo, have you come to yell at me some more?
No, not right now. My throat hurts from earlier, he admitted, hoisting himself up onto a part of the table still standing. His legs brushed the dwarf's thighs, and he found that he was now eye level with the king for the first time. It was a rather nice feeling.
Good. My ears hurt from listening to Gandalf yell,
the dwarf revealed, glancing down to where their bodies touched, before looking back to Bilbo's face.
Balin and Dain believe I should ask Threadwill for help.
They are correct, he agreed, watching Thorin's face in return. We will need the elves and men if we want to survive the upcoming battle. Thorin shook his head viciously, unwinding his braids even more.
I can't ask them for help. My pride will not allow it.
Is your pride more important than the lives of your people? He pointed out, raising his brows. The lives of your nephews and friends? What good is pride to the dead?
You don't understand. My pride was all I had left after Erebor fell,
the dwarf said, his lips turning down into a painful-looking frown.
I lost my kingdom, my people, my title, and even my family. I had nothing left but my pride for so long that I don't know how to exist without it. What sort of king would I be without pride?
Bilbo couldn't say. He didn't know what made a king good or bad, only what could kill them. Thorin, you say you cannot agree to a deal, but what if I created one for you?
I would not ask that of you,
refused Thorin, shaking his head.
All you must do is stay safe. Focus on only doing that.
No one would be safe once Agzog led his army to Erebor. Bilbo knew that, and he could see in Thorin's eyes that he knew it too. Are you still blind to what is before you? He wondered, staring into the shadowed blue.
I am not insane,
the king rebutted, but his eyes never changed.
I wish you would believe me.
I wish I could believe you, he admitted, because it would have made things so much easier to handle. But I can't deny what I see before me. You can doubt me and even hate me if you must, but I swear, Thorin Oakenshield, that I will save you from this madness. At his words, something shifted in Thorin's eyes. A light went off in them like a firecracker in the night sky. Before he could ponder why, Bilbo found himself tugged closer as Thorin wrapped his arms around his hips and buried his face in his stomach.
He squeaked and tried not to push the dwarf off of him.
I'm happy to have met you,
The king said, his deep voice muffled by clothes and flesh.
I'm so glad Gandalf chose you. You have made my life better simply by existing, Bilbo Baggins.
Bilbo felt his breath catch. Oh, was it possible to feel both joy and grief at the same time? Because he was quite sure that was what his heart was experiencing at that moment, before he could stop and think, because thinking would only get him into trouble. He lifted his hands and buried them in the mess of inky black curls in his lap. Thorin stiffened for a moment before tightening his grip on the hobbit's hips and thighs. Bilbo didn't mind and hugged the king back as well. I'm happy to have met you too, he whispered, closing his eyes to resist the tears that were rising. So very, very happy. He wished he could say how truly happy he was to have seen Thorin again. To have talked with him, laughed with him, cried with him, and even argued with him. It was truly a gift to be alive to live alongside the lost love of his life again. It didn't matter that Thorin did not love him back or was losing his mind to a rock. It was simply enough that he was still alive. It was rather unfair, really, how different love turned out to be when he found it. Bilbo had been expecting something from the stories and poems that he had read all his life. But love turned out to be nothing like the stories painted it to be. Thorin did not complete him, or make him suddenly love himself more. He could live on without the dwarf in his life, had even done so for many years, and had been happy for the most part. And though he had never stopped loving the king, he certainly didn't waste away like some mourning heroine from the stories. But what he did find from love was this. He didn't need Thorin to complete him, no, but the king did inspire him to be a better person. He could live his life happy alone, yes, but it would be even better with the dwarf in it. And though he didn't bleed to death from his broken heart, he certainly cried his eyes out over the loss of the only soul he had ever fallen for. Maybe his love wasn't the type that the bards would ever sing of, but it was still real and true. His hobbit heart was not as loyal as a dwarven one, nor as everlasting as an elven heart, but the love it carried was just as strong. It was a love that burned in his chest for 80 years and would burn on for 80 more, because his heart could not forget the joy it felt in loving another person. I love you, he thought, curling the thick hair around his fingers as a few tears slipped through. I love you, I love you, I love you, and I'm sorry, but I can't watch you die again. I'm sorry, Thorin. So sorry. Thorin lifted his head and looked up at his face. When he saw the hobbit crying, his eyes grew wide, and he lifted one hand to Bilbo's cheek.
Do not cry, Gavashel. Everything will be fine. We will win this battle.
He simply closed his eyes again as Thorin's thumb wiped away some of his tears. Nothing would be fine, because he was going to betray Thorin's trust and ruin their friendship again. Nothing would ever be fine because life was nothing like stories, and there was no happy ending waiting for him at the end of the road. I'm so sorry.